Everyone thought she was just another quiet waitress at a glamorous hotel banquet. But when a billionaire challenged her to sell him a rose in Arabic, no one knew that her words carried decades of memory, heartbreak, and truth. By the end of the night, silence, respect, and revelation would speak louder than wealth or power. Rain outside drummed gently against the tall glass windows of the Al Mansour Hotel. Inside, the banquet hall shimmered, chandeliers dripping gold light, laughter echoing through polished marble, the scent of roses mingling with crystal wine. Waiters moved in synchronized precision, balancing trays as music swelled softly from the live piano near the stage. Among them was Nadia, her steps quiet, her presence almost invisible. She had learned that invisibility was sometimes a shield, one that kept her safe, unseen, and observant. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pinned neatly, and her gaze, calm but alert, took in every detail around her. At the center table sat Omar Saif, the young billionaire everyone whispered about. He leaned back in his chair, confidence radiating like perfume, expensive, heavy, and meant to fill the room. His friends surrounded him, investors, heirs, and socialites with laughter just a bit too loud, gestures just a bit too rehearsed. Omar twirled his wine glass, watching the liquid catch the chandelier's reflection. "Tell me," he smirked at one of his guests, "do you ever get tired of pretending to care about people poorer than you?" Laughter erupted. Nadia didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Cruelty disguised as humor, power disguised as charm. As she placed a folded napkin beside Omar's plate, she noticed the gold-embossed name card before him. Omar Saif, Al Hamdan Foundation. Something in her chest tightened. That name, Al Hamdan, was once whispered in her childhood home, tangled with stories her mother never fully told. Omar's voice snapped her back. "You move like you're solving a puzzle," he said, tone teasing. "Relax, this isn't a battlefield." Nadia's polite smile didn't waver. "No, sir, just a banquet." His friends chuckled again. One of them added, "She probably practices that calm face in the mirror." Nadia quietly excused herself and walked toward the floral display near the piano, a large vase overflowing with red roses, their scent rich and faintly nostalgic. She adjusted one stem slightly off balance. Behind her, the conversation grew louder, looser, and more careless. Then, a sudden sound, the crash of glass and roses spilling onto the marble floor. Dozens of eyes turned. Water, petals, and shards scattered like a red storm at Nadia's feet. Omar's smirk deepened. The vase lay shattered, roses bleeding color into the marble floor. A ripple of laughter spread across the hall. Not cruel at first, just curious. The way people laugh when someone else's dignity costs them nothing. Nadia bent down, calm and deliberate, her hands collecting petals instead of shards. The pianist's melody faltered, uncertain whether to keep playing. Then Omar's voice rose above the murmurs, playful, but edged with something sharper. "Well," he said, tilting his head, "I suppose we just learned she's better at breaking displays than arranging them." Laughter again. Louder this time. His friends clinked glasses. Nadia said nothing, brushing her palms together. "My apologies, sir. I'll have it replaced immediately." Omar leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. "No, wait," he interrupted. "Let's make this more interesting." He reached down and plucked one rose from the mess, its stem dripping with water. "Tell you what, sell me this rose." In Arabic, the words hung in the air like smoke. A guest snorted. "She probably doesn't even speak Arabic, man. You think she's got time for poetry while serving drinks?" Even the manager, hovering at the edge of the room, stiffened nervously. This was the kind of moment where most people apologized, laughed awkwardly, and moved on. But Nadia didn't. She rose slowly, meeting Omar's amused gaze. "Sell it to you, sir?" He smirked. "Yes, impress me. Make me want to buy it. And if you do, I'll pay you $10,000. Gasps scattered around the table. 10,000 for a rose. For humiliation, really. Nadia's fingers brushed against the petals, delicate but sure. She looked not at Omar, but at the flower, as though listening to something it was trying to say. "Very well," she said softly. "But I'll speak in the language the rose deserves." Her tone shifted, steady, clear, and suddenly musical. She began to speak, her voice rapping the air in classical Arabic, fluid and resonant. At first, the guests exchanged puzzled glances. Then the laughter faded. Even the pianist's hands froze above the keys. The cadence of her words painted images, of deserts and dawns, of lovers separated by oceans and time. Omar's smirk faltered. Something in her phrasing, a rhythm, a phrase, stirred an echo he thought he'd forgotten. Nadia lifted the rose slightly. "The rose," she said softly, "never asks for a price, only to be remembered." And for the first time that night, the billionaire didn't know what to say. Omar leaned back, exhaling slowly. "That's not just Arabic," he said, voice low. "That's poetry." Nadia inclined her head slightly. "Language is music, sir." "Some just forget the melody." A murmur rippled through the group, admiration mixed with discomfort. One of Omar's friends tried to laugh it off. "Well, looks like she's got more than serving skills, huh?" But Omar didn't respond. His gaze was fixed, not on her uniform, not even on the rose, but somewhere far beyond both. A flicker of recognition shadowed his expression, like a memory surfacing through water. He turned the rose stem between his fingers, eyes narrowing slightly. "Where did you learn those words?" Nadia met his gaze without fear. "From someone who believed words could outlive us." The reply struck him harder than it should have. His throat tightened, though he couldn't say why. The words, the rhythm, they weren't just familiar. They were his, somewhere in the back of his mind. He heard his younger self whispering them, long ago, in a house that smelled of salt and sea, and suddenly, the rose in his hand felt unbearably heavy. The banquet faded from his senses. He was 17 again, sitting on the terrace of a whitewashed house near Khor Fakkan, waves murmuring below the cliff. A notebook rested on his knees, its pages rippled by sea air. His handwriting curved with the uneven rhythm of youth, Arabic verses raw with feeling. Beside him sat Layla, her laughter soft, her eyes tracing his words as if memorizing them. "You write like someone afraid of forgetting," she'd told him once. He had smiled then. "Because I am." He remembered pressing a rose between the pages of that notebook, a promise sealed in silence. But wariness and pride had led him elsewhere. Letters unsent, calls unanswered. And eventually, her name, Layla, became just another ache he learned to ignore. Now, decades later, a woman in a waitress uniform spoke his words back to him. Exact in tone, perfect in rhythm. Omar blinked, returning to the banquet hall. The music had stopped. The air was thick with quiet expectation. He looked at Nadia again. Her face was calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her. But her eyes, they held something that didn't belong here. Something ancient. He spoke softly, almost to himself. "Who taught you to speak like that?" Nadia hesitated. "Someone who believed words could outlive us." Her voice carried no arrogance, no defiance, only truth. It unsettled him more than any challenge ever had. "Your accent," he murmured. "It's not from the city." "No, sir," she replied. "My mother raised me near the coast. She used to work for a family, the Al-Hamdan estate in Sharjah." The name hit him like a current. His hand froze mid-air. Al-Hamdan. Layla Al-Hamdan. He tried to breathe, but the air seemed to thin. His voice came out rougher than before. "Did she ever mention Layla?" Nadia's silence was answer enough. Her eyes lowered, then lifted again, steady and full of quiet gravity. "Yes," she said. "Every day." Omar turned slightly, glancing toward his group of friends who had gone silent, watching the exchange like spectators at a play that had suddenly turned too real. He gestured for them to give space. They obliged, murmuring excuses as they drifted toward the bar, leaving him and Nadia at the center of the quiet. She often spoke of a letter, one written by a man she never named. A letter in Arabic. She called it the letter that broke her heart and saved her soul. Omar's eyes closed briefly. That line, he remembered writing it. The ink had smudged where his hand trembled. "Your mother," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "What was her name?" "Samira," he exhaled sharply, a sound half memory, half disbelief. "Samira was the one who brought her tea every morning. She used to read the poems aloud when I couldn't." Nadia's eyes softened. "She remembered you. Even after Layla passed, she spoke of a young man who wrote beauty he didn't believe he deserved." Omar looked down at his reflection in the wine glass. A man who had built empires, yet couldn't face the ghost of a single verse. "Did your mother ever tell you? What happened to the letter?" he asked, voice trembling. Nadia's gaze shifted toward her apron pocket, where something small rested, wrapped in faded silk. "My mother said it was the only thing Layla asked her to keep safe. She didn't want it buried with her," she said. "If fate ever brought her words back to the one who wrote them, let him see what love looked like when it survived in silence." Omar's throat tightened. He felt the room tilt slightly, the clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation in the distance, all of it receding into nothing. Nadia carefully untied the silk knot, revealing a folded parchment, its edges yellowed, corners worn smooth by time. The faintest scent of rosewater lingered, like something that refused to fade. "I memorized parts of it as a child," she said, unfolding it with delicate precision. "My mother would recite it when she missed her friend. She said Layla used to listen to the sea at night and whisper the same lines." Omar's voice was hoarse. "Read it." Nadia nodded, eyes flicking briefly across the ink that had long turned sepia. Then she read, slow, measured, reverent. "I loved you not for what you said, but for what you silenced in me. I feared not the distance, but the day your voice would fade from the sea. If you must remember me gently, for memory itself can wound." Her voice faltered at the last line. When she looked up, Omar's expression had crumbled. The confidence, the polished veneer, gone. "I wrote that," he whispered, barely audible. "When I left for Cairo, I never sent it. I thought it was lost." Nadia folded the letter slowly, pressing her fingers along the same creases her mother once had. "It wasn't lost, sir. It was kept, cherished. Layla said those words taught her how to live with what she couldn't change." The table around them seemed to hold its breath. For the first time in years, Omar Saif's eyes shimmered not from power or light, but from something deeply, quietly human. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of rain against the windows deepened, soft but insistent, like a memory knocking from another life. Nadia refolded the parchment with care and slipped it back into the silk cloth. Then, from her apron's inner pocket, she withdrew a small leather pouch, frayed at the edges but clearly cherished. "My mother gave me this," she said quietly. "She told me to keep it until the man who wrote the letter stood before me." Omar's gaze followed her hands, steady, graceful, as she opened the pouch and drew out a single pressed rose. Its color had faded, but not entirely. Deep crimson clung stubbornly to the petals, as if time itself refused to steal its last breath. She laid it gently on the table between them. "My mother said this was the rose that came with the letter. Layla pressed it the night she received it, though she never knew how it reached her. She believed someone, perhaps a servant boy, perhaps the sea breeze, had carried it to her window." Omar's fingers trembled as he reached forward. When they brushed the edge of the rose, something inside him seemed to unravel. He could still feel the same veins under his thumb, the same small imperfection on the petal where he'd once nicked it while writing. "It's still red," he whispered. Nadia nodded softly. Some memories refuse to fade, even when everything else does. Around them, the banquet continued. Muted laughter, the soft hum of a new melody, waiters moving cautiously, pretending not to stare. Yet here at the center table, time had stopped. Omar looked up at her, eyes wet. "All these years I thought those words died with the boy who wrote them. I buried him under Deal's speeches headlines, and still..." He shook his head, voice breaking. "They found me." Nadia didn't respond immediately. She simply met his gaze, not with pity but with understanding. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Some words don't die. They wait, and sometimes they choose when to return." Omar bowed his head slightly, the rose resting between his palms like a fragile truth rediscovered. The storm outside grew heavier, streaking the windows with silver lines. Inside, the hall had dimmed to a softer gold. Guests drifting toward laughter and dessert, unaware that at the center table, two strangers were quietly unspooling the past. Omar sat down slowly, his usual air of command replaced by something more fragile, almost reverent. He kept the rose on the linen before him, fingers tracing its edge as though afraid it might vanish. "When I wrote that letter," he began, voice low, "I was a different man. I had nothing, no wealth, no name worth saying aloud. Just words, Layla believed in them more than I ever did. He looked up, eyes meeting Nadia's. I thought if I left I'd find myself. But all I found was noise. Nadia listened, her face still and patient, the way her mother used to listen when people needed to empty their hearts. She waited for years. She said softly, Layla told my mother that she forgave you long before she fell ill. She said she never blamed you for leaving, only for never writing again. Omar's breath trembled. I didn't think she'd read it. I never meant for it to reach her. But it did, Nadia said, and she carried it until her last day. He leaned back, a hollow laugh escaping his chest. And I carried its absence. His gaze drifted toward the chandelier's reflection in the glass. Every success I chased, it was all noise trying to drown out silence. A pause settled, long and alive. Then Nadia said, Maybe tonight. That silence finally spoke again. He looked at her, searching her expression. In her composure, he saw something both grounding and painful, a grace that didn't need forgiveness, only acknowledgement. Your mother, he said quietly. She must have been remarkable. She was, Nadia replied. She believed dignity was the quietest form of strength. Omar nodded slowly, the truth cutting deeper than any humiliation could. Around them, the staff began clearing plates, careful not to disturb the fragile calm between them. For the first time that night, there was no audience, no pretense, only two lives bound by a letter, a rose, and a language that had finally found its way home. Omar remained still for a long time, his thumb brushing over the pressed rose like it might speak again if he waited. The hall's laughter and music returned to life, but he didn't join it. Something in him had shifted, the kind of shift that doesn't show on the face but rewrites everything beneath it. He looked up at Nadia, who stood poised, her apron neatly folded, her eyes lowered, not from submission but quiet composure. You shouldn't be serving tables, he said finally. His tone wasn't commanding anymore. It was thoughtful, almost hesitant. Nadia blinked. Sir? He turned slightly, signaling to the banquet manager who had been pretending not to eavesdrop from a few feet away. What's her name? The manager cleared his throat nervously. Nadia, sir, one of our part-time staff. She's... Not anymore, Omar interrupted gently. Move her to guest relations. Translation, communications, PR, wherever her language can breathe. She has a gift and I don't want it wasted. The manager's eyes widened. Of course, Mr. Saif. Immediately, Nadia opened her mouth to protest, but Omar raised a hand. This isn't charity, he said softly. It's recognition. For a second, the room seemed to tilt toward stillness again, not the heavy kind from earlier, but a quiet filled with respect. Even the guests nearby, those who had laughed at her before, lowered their gazes, unsure how to respond to what they'd witnessed. Nadia looked at him carefully, searching for arrogance and finding none. You don't owe me anything, sir, he smiled faintly. You reminded me of something I owed myself, and someone I never properly thanked. A subtle warmth flickered behind her composure. She nodded once. Then I'll accept for my mother. She'd have said the same thing. Omar's gaze softened. Samira's daughter, he murmured. I should have known. Only someone raised by her could speak like that. Around them, the soft notes of the piano resumed as though the world, satisfied with their reconciliation, allowed motion again. For the first time that evening, Nadia smiled. A real one, light but steady. It wasn't victory, it was grace. The banquet thinned to murmurs and clinking glassware. Waiters gathered the empty plates, guests trickled out into the marble lobby, and the chandeliers dimmed to a softer hue. Nadia stayed behind, her quiet steps echoing through the half-empty hall. She gathered the roses from each table, their petals wilted now, except one. The single crimson rose Omar had given her still stood tall in its glass. She reached for it, hesitating when she saw the tiny streak of gold in the stem, a ribbon once tied to her mother's letters. Her breath caught. She hadn't seen one in years. You noticed, came Omar's voice behind her. She turned, startled. He stood near the door, no longer the powerful tycoon in command, but simply a man in reflection. His jacket was folded over his arm. His voice held no grandeur. My mother used to tie those ribbons, Nadia said quietly, when she sent notes to guests at the embassy. Polite words in many languages. She did the same for me, Omar replied. when I was learning Arabic. She told me once, every rose speaks a language, but only to those who listen. I didn't understand it until tonight. For a moment, they stood in the dim glow, surrounded by tables and empty glasses, symbols of noise that had finally gone silent. Nadia smiled faintly. She believed in grace more than pride. Then she raised you well, Omar said. His tone was sincere now, stripped of the arrogance that once hid behind it. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to see how far that grace can go, perhaps at Saif International. You'd fit among the ones who speak with meaning. Nadia looked down at the rose, then back at him. Maybe, but for now I think I'll just keep translating the world one table at a time. Omar chuckled softly. Then I'll make sure this table is reserved. Always. She laughed under her breath, placing the rose gently into a napkin before walking past him. As the doors closed behind her, Omar looked once more at the empty hall, at the rose's lingering scent, the faint echo of her voice, and whispered, almost to himself, "Sell me these roses in Arabic." But the air stayed still, content that the sale had already been made. Sometimes, the most expensive thing in the room isn't gold or glass. It's dignity, spoken softly, in a language too few bother to understand. That night a millionaire came to test pride and left remembering grace, and a waitress, who once stood invisible in the glow of chandeliers, reminded the room that fluency isn't measured by tongues, but by truth. If you like this story, hit like, share, and subscribe. Comment below from wherever you're watching. Thank you for being here.